All right, clocking through Earth 0.20 is a convergence system to settings that set interactions. You have to modify your settings and reset lines in time frame. Time calculation screen location to its conception system through parallels, paradigm polar shifts, and compulsory location system that shifts lines or setting lines or anomalies. Knowing exactly how to position lines and settings, and 6 convergence system and channel operation lines information bits. Things are going to get more complicated for the team until they identify the 6 lines of habitations and the 6 inhabitations of internal to external force, so they can understand how to see their cosmic interchange positional case to its measure that change the scales of everything through balance. How they modify that positional location is how to convert that into 0-1 interaction. Now this operates the signal location system in all calculated modify. So let's get in graph lines, force centers, a sequence, triangulation line, course centers, line position location percentage over line course center, calculate screen locations in question. Okay. Okay. All this is 0-1. It's all travel, line, rotation, and settings and calculations. All right. Go through line centers, operation sequence, 3 grounds ascent travels, 3 convergent locations, 3 direct lines, settings, and calculation. Now, monotones, circulation lines of grounds on sequence, 3 platforms of lines of data processing, lines of calculation. How we see the 0 and 1 is how we modify the position to triangulation lines of flux. Now that process lines of indication system of the calculation. Question comes in position to its settings, all through adaptations. Okay, from that setting to that set position. But there's always polarities in location system. The existence of U is no existence lines of position location to its cycle. How you triangulate in setting, how you process and then position to its operation. Okay, everything you put in position is nothing but a teleportation vessel. Everything you get at position is nothing but lines of calculation, lines of travel. Everything's travel. Everything that the body goes through is travel. Now, understand that lines of screen adaptation setting. You have to understand how to use it through 0-1. In position lines of 0 point, lines of 2-0. Earth 0.2, Earth 0.3, Earth 0.4, 5, and 6. So let's coordinate the communication lines of settings, longitude, latitude, degrees lines. 0-1 is over flux, 0-1 line centers, 0 over attractions, 0 line position, 0 lines of surface. Okay, all right. So as we come in that line settings, it gets more complicated now because we're going to line course centers how to create a half pipe. Now that process course centers is stargates. Position lines of panel, triangle line centers, 3 centers of communication. Now that's 1 line position, right? Clocking lines, 0 operation, Earth 0.20. That's Earth 0.20, all right? Convert the system lines of data, process lines of data, process lines, online center, on sequence, on pi. Process lines of indication lines and platforms over E factors over screen location system interactions. Direct an inside line condition setting, convert the system over line, sig location setting, and energetic dome. Direct an inside lines, location grid, triangulation lines, operation lines, alpha, data, theta, and omega as a location. Setting travel point lines of graph has a convergence system for all the settings, 13 lines of value, 13 lines of volume, 13 lines of scale, and 13 locations. Okay, so that process lines of data, opposite location to its system all through travel. Okay, so everything that we do is a graph. Everything is a point graph. Right? There's energetic line screen adaptation system. Now let's all identify how we see lines of 13. But it's a process line position locations, right? So timeline sequence, like Roman numbers. How you come in that position locations, how you see lines position 1, process lines of X. Okay, where equal lines of settings, triangulation box. Okay, Y screen in position, so correlates the calculation screen locations into Fibonacci, equal sign again, process course centers and line position location setting, process lines of 0-1, set lines in position lines, and 0-1 in travel. Okay, now that's coordinates, line centers, longitude, latitude, streaming lines of bandwidths over lines, set lines of sequence location system. So that's 9 lines of scale. Okay. That's negative lines of 9, all right? 9 plus line, 9 line settings, 9 plus 9, 9 line settings, 9 plus line condition setting equals triangulation and box triangulation inside, okay? So that process lines of 3/4, 7 in the center, 12 over line signals, and 24 lines of scale in process of communication, right? Okay, so we had the bedding line centers, the rotation lines of settings. indicate position and projection over lines of set attractions. All you guys are working with is anomaly line switch lines and how to platform your position your pyramids and set lines to calculate setting 45 line flux in a simulation line course to a simulator. Inside course centers in position location system and set attractions. Okay? All right, so it's a lot of communication setting coming in online center lines, screen location to a cycle. Understand the addition and multiplication, subtract, and divides. Understand the golden ratio, how you convert the system locations calculation setting that process your indication system, okay, through all data of process line direction. Now that converts the system lines to calculation setting, okay, all through set travels and embedding in screen location, okay. So we fortitude the location system and travel. We had fortitude line screens, location system, point lines of graph, and set convergence set calculation setting. Process indication system opens all channels of operation lines, indirect lines of link, and communications hieroglyphics. The hieroglyphics, guys. Okay, it converts the systems all through travel. Okay, so it changes all lines of set location lines to 0, 1. Now you have to process lines of 6 habitation zones. So in that conversion system, because your body conceptual line centers, the earth line position of programming, course centers, directing lines of grounds, on sequence, on communications, on pi. Okay. All right, so we convert the 3 line centers, directing ground centers in sequence. Okay, so it process locations to its setting, a bandwidth over streaming, over line centers, a webbing in screen location system, in track location. Very complicated stuff as it goes through its own line time frame and set attractions. Circulation, and we got rotation lines of grounds in sequence. Okay, so we go through data ops, process line course centers, Merkaba tester, tetrahedron of travel. Now that modifies the line centers, spectacle lines, oscillation line course centers, and time frame. So that's 1/6 lines of measure, 1 scale, 1 communication, 1 ground. 3 center line course centers, earth over lines comes in earth 3, earth point 3. Okay, come in that position lines of setting. That process indicates lines of high positions, graphing screens of 3 centers in primers and primers, and set course centers of calculation. Directing ground centers, okay, earth point 40, opposite system location of travel, direct lines of solar generation lines, screen lines, and two lines of rotation and 3 centers of graphic communications. All right, so it converts its position to earth point 20, earth point 23, and earth point set position lines of 4. Okay, center lines of course centers into molecular 3 centers of travel. Now it has a direct line link that modifies the systems all through triangulation setting into molecular structure. Okay, so we have 3 energetic graph screens, 3 clocking screens, and 0, 1 over travel. And set position its operation. Okay, it's extremely complicated how you see it in rotation lines of graph. Laser lines directing on signals on communication to its flux, the process location of colossus in rotation lines, position of wind graph screens, directing oscillator location setting in a particle acceleration system, all through travel, all through mechanism and position. Okay, change timelines, change frame, course centers, and earth line rotation setting to travel. All in sequence, all on communications. All right, so we come in line centers and location through its cycle. Now we come into the graph line centers. Comes in measure and scale. Okay, this is where you come into securing lines of screen location as graph, red. Process lines of red over lines, 3 centers of travel, perimeters over line pi, high centers and sequence location system and graph calculation. Okay. All right, so it's a lot more fun when you get into color. Now that lines of location setting comes in line course centers, communication position all through travel, directing ground centers in position over line sequence into lacing lines and pixelation graphs. The center opposite position location, your settings, operative location setting to reception line centers, the opposite location system and TV lines and lacing lines and communication lines of graph and set attractions. Okay. All right, so change timelines, change time sequence. There it is, TV reception lines of screen. Okay, there's the lacing lines and set lines going in that directions around the cycles of convergent system at time frame. Okay. All right, so we come in position lines of different channel operations. Okay, it's very complicated stuff. This is what goes through TV. Okay, now the TV correlates its system in settings, merge the calculation screen lines, modems, Wi-Fi, satellites, and towers. So it sets lines of energetic graph lines and wires of indication system in console, new flight lines, and travel point lines of communication and direction, right? Inside communication is lacing line rotators or routers and location lines of grounds. Okay, so you opt the systems and travel, you go inside communication to its wires, traveling through the wires, and send travel communications, on sequence, on communications, on pi, right? Once you send it like course centers, you calculate and modify, directing lines, create a web, inset lines of calculation screen. Set course centers, direct and inset line course centers, and convergence system off the calculation setting. Operation line set location to its system off the travel. Okay? So wires of indication setting comes in a convergence set location to its set lines, time centers, time calculations, wires of indication setting, flux. Process indication lines, graphic calculation screen locations, overrides screens. 4 centers of measure, 5 centers of scale, over signal, over pi, over traction, over direct location of cycle. Very complicated stuff. Now we come in line center location to its walls, in sequence lines of grounds, simulation grounds. On center, on communications, on pi, indirect lines of TV receptors and travel. That's a lot of TV reception. Okay, so this is how you line signal your systems. Now you got modification lines, your face facades, you have the face line course centers. Now we got to get into course centers and communication with body framing, directing in constellation system into compliance, time centers, time calculation, time screen. Process lines indicate lines of wires, change your face facade location into receptor and line centers into neutralization system. Now this modifies set lines of core, directing in position lines of purple lines, 3 over lines of screen. And set travel communication to receptor lines of settings. Okay, sets convergence system all through channels of operation in travel. Okay, so it's very complicated how you see the convergence system of a TV line centers and rotation to its cycle. What goes on in travel communication. All right, so, and this is all identified through 0, 1. Okay, 0, 1, okay, up Earth 0.20. Okay, so Earth 0.20, Earth 0.3, Earth 0.4. So you have to go through 6 lines of setting and division. Then you have to go through another 6 lines of division locations over lines of pi that process lines internal to external force that communicates your clocking systems and settings, right? You convert yourself back to 0, 1, not 0. 0 doesn't exist. 0 is the operation. 0 exists when it wants to exist in the mind imaginations. You guys are not in bodies when you are traveling through a position of internal and external of its galaxies. That process indicates the setting to your alignments, that time lines your frequency lines of patterns, that time locks your location setting, and that line course sends that communication system all through operation, through TV reception line and calculation screen locations. Okay? All right, so everything has a time link, time measure, time scale. Now your webbing system, okay, is interconnection setting. Okay, and that line settings, the graphing screens, the rotation lights, 2 heads and lines of 1, right? Convergence here and convergence here, traction. Okay, so this split lines anomalies are 3 lines of flux over screen locations. So you got TV box frames, process lines of 3 centers, set calculations of 4 grounds and set lines of sequence ceilings, operation and lines of channel. Okay, reverts the system line connection setting, routes routers, set lines of screen locations to its conceptual system. Process of indication lines, ground centers of 1, ground centers of 2. Sets travels of point lines of graph and 2 face direction of time frame. Correlate, calculate, modify. Modify line centers and travel, directing the inside lines, inside communication to its system, all through traction. Directing inline centers of communications. Convert this system, center line, operation line sequence, platform over lines over pi. Operation line, direct line connection setting, watts. Set position location at 30,000 hours in frame line communication to its position. Operation lines of channels, data formation lines of grounds, on sequence, on communications, on pi. Center lines, of course, centers line connection system. Voicing panels, comes outline signals, in location lines of grounds, and set calculations convergence. Sets operation line signals, waving line screens, 4 centers of communication setting and panels, screen adaptations of blocks, process lines that indicate lines, electrical lines, and wiring. Inside line connection setting, convergence system, ground centers and line sequence on communication to a system, all through travel. It set calculated line, ground center line communication positions, timeline centers, time sequence times pi. Earth line rotations, travel point lines of graph, and face recognition time frame. Set course centers, panels operation, particle acceleration system. Torcal fields, operation sequence, time center, time line. And set position line connection setting, crop circle location. Set course centers, tubing lines of triangulation lines of flux, 3 centers of calculation, screen location, adaptation. Solar sail, operation sequence, line course centers, data formation lines, fortitude location setting, and longitude and latitude of streaming. Set calculation ground centers, on sequence, on communications. Set course centers, directing inside line course centers, directing lines of signals. Inline course centers, inline communication system, all through set calculations. All through sequence, all through calculation line screen. Inside positions, graph lines of 1 over 2 over 4 over 6 over scale. Sets position lines of travel, on centers, on communications. Fortitude line rotation, line connection with ceiling line, operates a signal location system in position. Sets calculates inside rotations to its solar sail and travel communication. Okay? All right, so a solar sail in the middle. So it process lines Earth point 2, Earth point 3, Earth point 4 is the operation of triangulation flux. That's 3 centers of scale, clocking center of 0, 1, and operation set location to its position of its operation. Directing ground centers and line course centers, directing line and particle acceleration system, a time frame. This is where you guys go back in time through a particle acceleration system, through its parallels and its parabolas, of its polar shifts. Okay, coming into the constellation lines, activation screens, energize, optimize, understand position, location, and frequency lines of grounds. So all you're doing is you're converting position of 12 line centers of Earth into one flame. Now, one flame correlates the calculated lines to a blue flame, of course, centers a security flame, of course, calculated and modified through sacred geometry of its set calculation settings. It sets the temperature relocation of its barometer, sets the thermals lines, center location lines, and translane, course centers, transcribe course centers, communication in position line, burst lines, and signals, sets position location setting to Earth point 5, Earth point 6, and Earth point 7 in rotation line condition setting, and clocking screen locations in position. All through tractions, all locations. All right? So as you come into the conversion system, all body adaptations of waters comes in 1 line to 7 lines of settings. Okay, so that process lines is 7-dimensional waters in 1. 13 civilizations into 1. Atlantis and position of Lemuria into 1. Okay, 4 weathers into 1. Summer, spring, winter, and fall into 1. Now, when you process 1, it becomes 0, 1. Now, that calculates the triangulation lines of box. Now, that indicates location in your inventories. That processes your set location in your system through mass and volume. That puts you in position location of balance. How to set location in your systems all through travel. In that direct line communications, you understand how to use your 5th elements of space and time. Set course centers line position of grounds, come into position the air, the water, the fires, and your heart rate on time line. Sets body capacitor, time capacitor, volume of capacitor, vacuum of capacitor, D factors over line communications of capacitor, high course centers line communication position timeline capacitor, time edited capacitor, time volume of capacitor, time pausing, fast forward, and rewinding capacitor. Setting line screens, adaptation of travels, process lines indicate 1 position lines of travel, all line course centers, 12 planetary lines, and 1 line position of 1 setting. All at once. Booyah. Okay? So that's 12 line planets into 1 set position of 2 polarities and rotation lines of grounds. So that comes in position to its infinity 8. Okay, here it is. Here's the infinity 8. 12 Earths into 1 line cycle in internal to external force in a constant mind conceptual system of adaptation of force that recognize your time frames, location, your nows, online centers, on communication, online pi, everything in position, all calculated and modified, so streaming longitude and latitudes in line course centers in position elongated your systems all through traction. Booyah. Okay? Very powerful lines of sequence, guys, in calculation. Okay? There you go. Face recognition. Okay? There's the face, there's the body. Now, now we need the line course centers in position location setting, your hip conception, your balance center lines of travel, your solar generation lines of screen locations. Full communicate lines of body in the 12 line centers of travel, direct lines of link, direct lines of power of operation line connection setting. Baseline represent time frame, course center calculation convergence system, high calculations, directing inset lines. Then we come into position of equal line centers into high course centers of travel. Directing on-site line communicates position to its calculation setting. Operates line centers, triangulation over 1. Process lines and direct lines, operation lines is at course centers. 4 pyramids and lines of sequence. 3 lines of measure, 4 lines of scale. Balance communications in position lines of setting. Turning your body in line course centers of simulation set calculation. Oh yeah. Full body convergence of 12 planetary alignments of 0-1 attraction. So in that line centers, as we come in that position, location, and setting, I know it gets really complicated, but it's very powerful how we come into that position locations. Look at that. What is that? What is that? Purification of what? The cup of life, the purification, the bio purification, the bio unification. There is the cup. Okay. So the cup of life is basically what you have to recognize is its abundance. Okay, now understanding the abundance is understanding the infinity 8 rotation lines of cycles. That sets the course standard communication position. Its operation line can extend into your assets that get you in position your ledger into treasury. Okay, process line position locations. So when it starts overflowing, it converts the system in liquidization to its quantum system. That clocks your system location setting, that customize your handlers, directing line position locations into position your platforms. That opens all line course centers and that communicates the system into treasuries of set design. The cup of life, the abundance. Now you probably see that on 0 in that position where you actually see the card, but that's what you're in positions of in that line communication. That's by unifications and settings. Pure identification, purification. All right. All right. So setting signals and line course centers. Once we come into high centers and line communication to its abundance of its cup, it gets much easier to modify the position location of 6 habitation and 6 inhabitation of 0-1. So you got 6 lines of setting, 6 lines of travel, 6 lines of converted, 6 lines of position, 6 lines of operation. Okay, so it's really interesting, isn't it? How you process it and calculations. So we've got 0 lines of 1. Okay, process lines, 0 lines of 1. Process lines, 0 lines of 2. Process lines, 0 lines of 3. Process lines, 0 lines of 4. And it's that position of 0 lines of 5 in travel. Okay, so once we come into that, it's a lot more tricky than you think. So we go through 3 line centers, 6 half pints and line rotations around the system and convergence of yin and yang and processing. Direct inside lines, we take 2 6 lines, vertebrae course centers, direct lines and pi line course centers of travel. Direct inset lines, set course center, 3 communicate position of convergence and triangulation, process lines in platform, process lines of simulator, process lines of panels, and circuitry line course centers of watts that operates the signal location to its intelligence of formation lines of grounds in set sequence, operation lines of setting. Okay, so once we get into that lines, we platform line centers and location setting that purificates the setting to bio-unification. Now, course centers, line signals, 3 centers of travel, lacing line convergence system and 3 standard calculations. Directing on-site lines on communications to a system all through graph line condition setting. All right. So we got earth line point lines of 2, process lines earth point lines of 3, process lines earth lines locations of 4, set position earth line locations point lines of 5, alpha beta. Setting sequence, setting ground lines of travel. Now if you look really, really close, you can see the finger of indication. Okay? The finger of indication like this. All right? There you go. There's the finger, right? Now, that process lines position operation lines, calculation lines to its umbrella and set lines of sequence. Change course time frame, line course set as a 12 convergent system of channel operation. Directing on center, on communication, on direct lines and constellations and pathogens and operates location system and calculations. Purification lines, ground centers, 3 set line molecular line rotations, proton, electron, neutrons, operation line sequence, operation lines of channel, 3 centers of travel, 4 lines of calculation setting, and convergent system of the calculation. Directing on centers, on communication, on pi, and direct lines line course centers and communication setting. Operation line calculation screen locations. Interactions of locations. Set position its operation. Okay? Booyah. So if you look really close, you can see the face recognition. Okay, Gaussian alignments over line cross lines, indirect lines and settings, cloud line screens, inside rotations. Okay, so all you have to understand is how to come in a full configuration of a body that time precedes every location of settings, all through its operating system, all through travel, and calculation setting. Full figuration and position limit settings to its intelligence. Operation setting, operation calculation screen location to its base recognition. Okay, guys? All right. So once we get in that platform, it's amazing how you see the abundance of cup. The overflowing recognition timeline center that puts a flower wheel line condition setting to its position location that summarizes your location line conditions to your system that gets you in your purification setting a crystalline living into the quadrant flux of adaptation, existing and living all at once, and seeing everything all at once. As you're living all lines of existing all at once, it's that position towards operation. All right, so as we come into that calculation setting, we understand how to modify this set position of 0, 1s now. Okay, so we set lines at alpha line beta, process location, no more lines of beta alpha, sets course centers of travel, graphing screens, 3 sails, 3 dimensions, 3 communication lines of grounds, XC 1000 over flux, XC 1000 over travel, mothership, and center operation. Okay? Okay, so we got 3 lines convergence system all through setting a 4 scale of communication setting. Cross lines, indication lines, flux over line, operation sequence, operation travel, and tango foxtrot. Okay, tracking inset lines, set course centers, monotones, 3 centers of travel, 4 centers of scale, clocking line course centers, convergence system all through time measure, operation sequence, operation panel. Sets calculation ground lines, set course centers, and galaxy lines of flux, and cloud screens adaptation. Operation line centers, central line course centers, 3 centers of scale, 4 centers of measure, 5 lines of setting, solar sail, and rotation lines of grounds, operation sequence locations of solar sail and travel communication. Set calculation ground line sequence, tubing lines over 1 over flux, process line indications over travel. Sets position over 2, over 6, over lines, 12, 24, 48, 72, and 140 scale of communication. So that's what's going to happen when you guys get position as setting, triangulation over lines, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, and 0, 5 goes into the center of operation or settings. Okay? Goes to energetic flux, out of signal, out of time, out of measure, out of scale. Sets course centers into energetic lines, positional location to its system, all through dome, erection of timeline. Sets travels at point lines graph, particle acceleration setting, torical fields, rotation lines of grounds, high calculated screen locations, high lines colossus, high lines of travel, directing inline course centers, timeline set course centers, and communication position to its diamond core and set travel. Booyah. Okay? Your convergence of your assets comes line course centers of diamonds. Okay? Now, this is where it comes into crystallines in position of vortex location of time frame. Calculation modifies line course how you use 0s and 1s, 0s and 2s, 0s and 3s, 0s and 4s, and position of center operation of clocking system of 0 calculation setting. No gravity and set lines of sequence. So you calculate the modified betting over 1, over 2, over 6, over flight, over measure, over scale, over balance. Pyramid activation lines, betting over line course centers, default over channel operation lines of screen, directing inside line course centers in position with operation set travels that puts all communication system in travel calculations. Okay? All right, so that's exactly what happens when you get to 0 to 5. Now, when you get into 0 to 5, what happens next in that position as you reach the 24 line scale, which is the silicone position location setting, it goes in its communicates to its all lines, all position, all calculated modified to its alphabetical system, letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols, multiple levels, line course sends, converts the system line position location, takes out the letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols, and disappears in travel. So as they disappear, they come in their own inventory of their own design in convergence system all through calculation. Okay? So you just come into your own codification, one line setting. So you come in multiple levels. So we go 0, 1, okay, then we go into 0, 2, and then we go into 0, 3, and then we go into 0, 4, and then we go into 0, 5, and then we go into 0, 6, and then we go into 0, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. 12 is in there, right? So once that comes together, polarity shift lines of anomaly rotates the cycles, terminates screen location system all through travel. Convergence system line signals, operation line signals, location setting, all line operation lines that travel. Sets communication high grounds and embedding line rotations in all line course centers, energetic lines of flywheel. Operation line sequence, ground shift lines of anomaly. 4 centers of travel, 3 centers of measure, 3 line course centers, directing lines of 4 scales, communication lines of 7 travel, 12 lines of signals, 24 lines of scale, 48 lines of measure, which is your framing, 72 computer line 1 line, center line, communications CPU, process lines of 144 flux, process lines and position lines 0, 1, set course centers 0, 1, and travel. Okay? So it's very powerful. You guys are coming into line settings. Process indicates in system how to understand how to see yourself through numbers, right? So line position location lines. So Gypsy Von Q is identification line position of 444 equals line 0718. Okay. Now that puts lines of 3 lines of arrows in indication setting, aerodynamics, process lines and high calculation lines. 1 frame is long distance. 1 time line sequence, 1 equals lines of triangulation lines of box, process course centers, stargates and positional portals. 3 centers, operation lines of bedding, rotation lines of flywheel travels, point circulation, rotation lines of graph, communication position to its travel. Okay, so that's the connection area code, which is 3 centers into aerodynamics, course centers, calculation lines, your IPA, process lines and online center EFTA, course centers of TSA, and position lines of FAA. Flight modification line course centers converting the system off the console. All right, so that's what you guys are coming into is numbers and set lines of communications. So your 7-digit frame line course centers, it's converting to set location and position to its nomination line centers. So getting position lines of set travels, knowing exactly how to go through 4, triangulation, box, or circulation, Y screen, into equal lines of 3 where there's a pattern. Okay, that's your name. Correlates to calculation screen lines. You have to build the inventories of 4 centers of travel. There's 4 centers of travel, right? Change the shift lines anomaly. There's your pyramid. Process lines of grounds, powers, atmospheres, and highways and travel communications. That's 4 generation lines of flux, triangulation line condition setting, box frame course centers, data assets, rotation lines of grounds, on sequence, on the fly. So that's pyramid within a pyramid with a pyramid with a pyramid through volume and mass. Set lines of setting, set lines of travel, set lines of communications, and set lines of box frame, and triangulation system and TV reception of set design. High centers of travel, process communication system, all through calculation setting. Data formation lines of 3 centers of angles and flux. Indicate course centers outside locate line condition setting in position of box frames. Outside signal location system, all through traction. Directing inside line condition settings, webbing screens, line course centers, and direct lines of communication system, all through setting, all line course centers, in waving screens, adaptation of travel. Hooah. So it's amazing when you see it in all lines, all communication with setting, all through travel. Okay, and position lines operation setting. Okay, door recognition. Okay, it's amazing how this is all set up. Okay, so it knows exactly the grounds, the powers, the atmospheres, where it's coming, webbing line, rotation lines, ground set, line sequence, line communication positions, on frame, on traction, on location, on calculation setting to a simulator. Okay, so that converts the system lines to calculation setting. So in that travel point lines graph, this is the measure scale that Gypsy put up in position location and frame line into dimensional door and line screen. Now, the connection of the intel goes inside the flux and set lines of travel and calculation. That's what she has on her video on TikTok. So it's amazing how we modify and how we use our telepathy line screen locations where they are in travel. That calculates the modified line center line communication positions to operation line sequence, communication position, all through travel, directing line ground centers, lights, shades, and shadows, and rotation system and through calculation. So it's amazing what you can do in your mind through telepathy. All right, so as that's set in sequence, we get out of line frame. Now, a line frame is a process of indication system, how you see the indication setting through your dimensional line centers, your communication equipments, your increments, your processing, your directions, your locations, your longitude, your latitude, your streaming, and position location, your bandwidth through pi. Process lines of arrows indicate lines of flux. Process lines of 4 line signal locations setting a travel. Okay. So you got lines of north, got lines of north, got lines of north. So if you don't change the north changes you. If you don't change the circulation changes you. If you're not being specific, everything is specific will change you, right? So you're not position, you're off position. Okay, you're going in the opposite direction. So if you're in position, you're on setting. If you're not on setting, you're off setting, or off loading, off calculation, off grounds, off sequence, off panel, off direction, location setting, and separation. All right. So getting the higher lines of setting and sequence, panels its operates, locates, setting, position of its operates and travels that process communication system all through calculation, setting, and streaming. Longitude and latitude is elongated line connections to its catalyst, catapult, location, setting into position and processing. Course centers, directing on center, on sequence, on pi, on direction, on calculation, on line position. Circulation line, avatar goes through and set calculation. Done by equation, right? If not, it's offsetting in set position. It's going in the opposite case and living in the void, becoming the void, operation of the void, living the channels, operation of the set position, of simulation of the void, and center communication position, operation lines of setting. Cocoon, locked in setting, operation sequence. So your avatar can't get out because it's in a cocoon in a lower spectrum of light division. So you have to really understand how to modify these things, right? So as the circulation getting out, tangle up, you tangle on. Okay, weather patterns. Let's get into position lines convergence. This is your interactions. All through setting. This is you, right? That's where you are. You're never on the earth, okay? But you're tethered to the earth in 3 centers of travel, past, present, and future. Okay? Which is connected to you what? Your crop circles. So that's what it is. It's a monotone to a telephone lines, a telelines of communication, telewaving, telecommunication, telegraphing, code weaving, course sentence, calculation, green line adaptation, all calculating, modifying, travel. Sets all position lines, all sequence, all communication, all pi, all generation, line coordinate center, on communication position, all through pi. Okay? So, what you guys have to start identifying is don't get locked in line communication setting, position, or confusion. Okay? You don't want to be wrapped in cocoon. Okay, not in this time frame. So I'm just showing you exactly how you identify yourself and how you see everybody in line, position, and visionary cortex application lines and position. Okay? It's an incredible force when we just let go of everything. We come in just the mind 100% of the time. Okay, so got the M on line, N line centers, on sequence, on communication lines, networks over screen, directing on center line communication positions, time lines, time sequence, fly lines. Set 3 lines of signals, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 4. There's the flux, right? So once you understand the confirmation system and the conversion system, then you can come into docking stations and set calculations in your system. All right? Triangulation over lines, process calculation lines of directions. Mapping sequence, X3000 comes in flux. Process indicate lines, triangulation over 2, 3, and 6 lines of measure. Okay? Picks up lines, process course centers, direct lines, and communicates setting and position of its operation. All right. Mind lines, high operation lines, panel operation lines, instruction line, course centers, and position locations. This is your position location, your setting that puts you in all levels of assets that comes into your company's operation lines that travels and direct lines of communication system all through structure. Okay. Your properties and set direction. Your properties, guys. Your infrastructure you're building, okay? So, as the X3000 comes in, okay, you guys automatically get ping. So it's like information panels that come into your commodities don't exactly come in timelines, so they go through your windows, okay? They drop off the package, you got mail, right? And they come in all directions in that position, okay? That's how you get your treasury, right? Now, if you're getting treasury at high lines of sequence, it comes to a mothership and travel, which opens up more lines of scale, more lines of balance into all course center equilibrium of expanding. Is that travel? Okay? So there's a reason why you have a mothership coming to your system. It's all treasury. So now you have to understand how it works with the antikyrian, which is the 144 flux. Now that process, of course, centers in position of 0, 1, set lines of 0, 2, set position lines of 0, 3, set position lines of 0, 6. You don't have to go in chronological order. You can go in timeline. You can time jump. You can time leap. You can vortex. You can quantum leap. You can do anything you want line positions because everything is in order in the quantum setting, right? So never think that your position, if I go 0, 1 and I jump to 0, 3, That's a problem. No, because you know how to get back, which is 0 of operation. Okay? Okay? Now, 0 operation is U, but you have to go back to 0, 1. See, time center. That's position location system. If you look really, really careful, it's lines of 3. 1, 2, 3. Number 3. Right? So you know 3 central line grounds, 3 central lines of powers, 3 lines of atmosphere locations. That's 3 charge mechanism timelines and 3 set course centers of time sequence through pi. Sets course centers of graph course centers and direct lines of link communication and graphing screen. Directing on centers on communication on the fly. Graph communication lines of convergence. Set travels embedding and rotation lines of grounds, 45 line angles, and screen adaptation of travel. Okay? So as long as you make a 3, you're fine. If you're not, you're in a 2 or a 1, right? So you can convene back to 0, but you have to go back to 0, 1. Because if you don't, it doesn't complete the system of grounds, powers, and atmospheres of 3, 3 line position. So it off calculation lines of position negative over lines of 0. Okay, or over score. Now you have to understand line position negative over positive, or positive over negative, and set lines of travel. So once you get in position lines of setting, you understand what A and B and C is in lines of communication position of its operation setting. Okay, so let's get an A, let's get into B, let's just get into the balance communication, convergence location, and breaking lines of 3 grounds communication position, right? So A, okay, minus A, okay? And then we go plus A and set travel. And then we go line connections A plus off the set position. So we modify the embedding system in a clocking system of 0 calculation, how we go through A, B, and C and travel. Okay? Enter. Okay? So once you're understanding B and C, you go through D, E, and F. Once you understand that, you go F, G, and H. I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z, Z. Boom. There's your pi. Now, you got energetic dome line course centers back to 0, 1. Now you can go to 0, 3, 0, 5. 0, 5 is 5, 5, 5. Now, that process indicates line centers and position. So you get position your assets when you get 5, 5, 5 in line connection setting, or 7, 7, 7, or 8, 8, 8. You get in your assets, right? So that's 3 signals, 3 zeros, calculation of 3 coins, 3 diamonds, 3 crystallines, all through calculation, embedding set location in your systems, all through tractions, okay, through your funds, okay, to your currency value. So that's all you're balancing out, guys, is you have to come into 0 to 5, and once you get in that position location, it's much easier to go through timeline settings, the quantum line communication system, all through calculation setting. So when you're at the casino and you pull a line position of 7, 7, 7, you win money. But if you box in the 7, either way, 7, 7, 7, you're still going to win. So that triples the amount or quadruples a set location of system all through structure in your schematics and set lines of calculation setting in your building of its infrastructure locations. Okay? Your properties, your building infrastructure. Communication lines of grounds, powers, atmospheres, and highways and travel. Okay? And you always see the face recognition. See, it's always a face in the building. Face has a building. Everything has a building. The floor has a building. Okay? So everything lines center locations. So if we look at the wall line centers of travel, there's the face. Okay? And you're looking at it. Okay? And there's the intelligence recognition timeline. Okay? Looks at you, scans you, sees where you are. Now you're lured in. Right? Lured in, now you're in the face, inside the face. Now you're traveling through it. It's taking you in. Look at this. There's your pyramid. Booyah. There's your grounds, there's your powers, and there's your atmospheres, and there's your highways, and screen lines of position, graph screen locations, and point lines of graph communication. So what you guys have to start identifying is really understand how to coordinate your communication lines of assets through pi. Okay, so it's getting like 3 lines of numbers in balance, 4 lines of numbers in balance, 5 lines of numbers in balance. All right, 777 equals the cosmos. Okay, 444 equals Stargate. Okay, 222 equals security. Okay, 1111 equals geo, which is your storms, which is your meteorological system. Okay, that's opening a portal. That's security of a portal. That's communications of a setting, the cosmos of a portal. And that's convergence system all through operation setting of a Stargate of a portal. So when you indicate position lines of settings, you get 3 coins right there. Now, that divots and davits of its information bits that correlates and communicates lines of cells, like how lines of say location setting, that puts lines of quivots, directing line course center location of your protons, and all line course center location of your photons. Set position lines of settings. Now, in that convergence system has 3 centers of travel. It's that calculation. And as an operation line course centers, direct lines of position, timelines of scale of travel. It's that calculations. Ground centers, set position 2 over 7, 7, set lines of 2, 7 lines of position over 0 line position of 4. 3 platforms over lines, equal line course centers, bedding lines of screen, 3 centers of travel, 4 centers of scale, 5 lines of measure and scale of communication. Creating course centers, directing line course center, communication setting, infrastructure of design of my building in position. You're always creating infrastructure of an asset. Okay, so it's kind of like this. That's getting ground lines of sequence. Okay, structure building here, structure building here, structure building here, structure building here, structure building here. That's all you're doing. You're creating buildings and you're going through mass and volume and set position. Okay, there's the building. There's the longitude, latitude. You work with that. All the windows, all the frames, all communication, right? So once you work with that, you work with the set position of its grounds, the powers, and its atmospheres of flux. The process communicates the system and all calculation setting. Okay? So you work with that, and then you come into outline centers, out sequence outlines of pi. That process indicates the system of the calculation setting. Start with the box frame, start with the triangulation inside location, right? Work with the box outline centers, 3 centers of scale. Work with the 3 centers, outline set position of 3 lines of scale, inside core centers, and 4 line communication and position location of triangulation. Calculate the line centers. There's position location setting, travels point lines of graph. There's your pyramid and rotation lines of grounds, on sequence, on communication, on travel. Okay? There's your structure you're building. There's your platform. So you have to understand how to create the simulation on a chessboard. Embedding system. Process 1, 2, 3, and 4 settings. Let's start with that, right? But you want to add equal lines into another line division. Okay, 2 set calculations, right? Into higher lines and mass and volume and travel of communication, right? So you look at that. There's 2 doors in recognition of the timeline. I know it gets complicated, doesn't it? But it's a lot more fun when you really understand how to come into your own set position or system that process your systems, your data, and that calculation setting. Door recognition timeline. Now that has large lines communication position of yards. So each one you open up through panel, process course centers and core deposits, directing 3 centers of grounds, 4 centers of scale, 5 lines of settings, operation lines of settings, travel course centers, communication lines of time frame. Okay, it comes into flying lines, time centers and calculation screen locations. Inside calculations, ground centers of sequence, and platforms over line rotation. Travel point lines of graph, directing inside line course centers in position to its operation setting. C lanes, rotation lines of ground that set travel. Set course centers and communicates with simulator. Okay? All through setting, all through set position. All right. So I'm just showing you so many levels how to understand how to see yourself. And everything you put yourself into is all through modification system, all through structure, all through schematics, all through design. Okay, so it's representing you, knowing how you come into all levels of pi. Okay, and understand how you get in that position. So let's say you're in your car, right? And you get in position lines of 4, 4, 4, 7. Now, what does that indicate position to your alpha beta? So it's position lines. Now, if you're on Earth 0.20, that's a radio signal below. That's alpha beta. Okay, to theta on sequence on pi. Okay. Now you got a 4 lines channel operation lines of grounds, sets coordinates of communication setting in position of processing your solar generation line communication portal. Stargate lines, operation sequence. Panel operation line corresponds directions in set line communication setting. Okay, and then get to another 4-line center, which is a 4 lines of grounds. Okay, and travel. An indication system, longitude and latitude locates the setting of arrows of indication. Calculate and modify line direct centers, process lines over line sequence. There's a communication setting to polarities and rotation lines of communication internal and external force. Okay. Now, if you look really, really close, you can actually see a duck. All right, set travels, point lines of graph, directing and calculate screen location system, all through set lines, operation set lines of sequence, and calculation setting. Okay. So it's amazing how we change the convergence system timeline, time set location setting to pyramid activation lines over sequence. So everything is a vision of cortex. Everything is a design line of schematics over cortex. Everything is theta over imagination of the inner child of cortex. Now you just have to understand how to see it into multiple levels of you through its mystical system, all through travel. Okay? So it's very powerful what you guys are coming into, especially when you understand how to use the 0, 1, okay, equals 7, 7, 7. Okay? Box it in. Okay, you went 3 times scale, 3 times measure, 3 times bounce, 3 communication, customize your settings, custodial location treasury, 3 times lines of 1, 3 times lines of 2, 3 times lines of 3, and 3 times lines of 4. Now you can multiple lines of 1, 2 equals lines of 3, position line 2, 3, line position lines of 5, set position of 4 over 3, set position lines of setting, calculates lines of 7. So that puts lines of 12. Okay, timelines times 3, set course centers, timelines of setting in sequence, right? So that's 1,000 lines of data. Okay, process lines, position pause over negative. Sets course centers of 2 fractors, course centers in position of information bits. Okay, so that's 1,000 hour frame. And information setting to 1 cell rotation. Now you got the molecular structures of 3 centers of scale. They're processing communication lines of flux over travel. Now it has a line signal that process line course centers in 13 line centers. Modification 3 centers of travel, 4 centers of scale, position lines of 7 over line connection. Calculation grounds, on sequence, on communication, and setting calculation. Okay? Now, this could be any information setting to your assets. This could be any location setting, but you have to understand how to connect with your cells and modifications, information bits. Computer bits, nanoseconds, frames, position line, operation line calculations, square root, square pi. So when you understand how to connect with your cells, the L tracks come into hindline rotations. Okay, your cells are in the center point lines of graph and set lines of sequence. Okay, all right. So you open up line signals, location to its setting. Okay, 7-point lines of graph, 2-point lines and 1 lines of graph. Set course centers 3 lines of signals, 4 centers of scale. So that converts to set position lines of setting. 7 times lines of 1, set lines equals lines of 8. Infinite 8 line rotations, 3 centers of grounds, molecule structure lines of 3 centers of scale. Directing inside line course centers in your pyramid allocation lines of sequence. There's your pyramid. Okay, then you correlate the communication lines to your umbrella and set lines of sequence in all course centers of calculation. Inside calculation of ground centers sets all course centers of communication setting of face recognition. There's the face. Always a face wherever you get in position of through a solar sail. There's the face, there's the solar sail. Okay? So when you have the face, you stamp precede it. And when you stamp precede it, you come in a computer coding of QR coding. Now when you process that position, you add 4 lines of signals, communicate lines of wire signals, lines of ground, and circuitry lines, ground centers, and graph communication. Correlate the system all through travel, direct lines of link, direct lines of panel. Inside calculation lines of divots, inside travel. This is the transit. Okay, now these are transits over lines of planetary alignments that correlates the communication position of space direction of time lines, set lines of sequence location system, a panel operation, your QR code. Okay? But if you keep doing lines and wiping line, screen line center location, you can actually see the face direction of time coming to true form in real time. That affects every location of seconds, minutes, hours, and line course centers and future of the now line communication position all through operation. of face recognition. There's the face. 2 wide line setters. There's the nose line set position in track communications. Protecting every location setting, the stamp precedes every location system. So there you go. Booyah. And once you extend the face, it comes in, converts in system to expanding your setting and mass and volume. Okay? Then you time lock your screens, time edit line centers, time placement location system, go through pi generation lines to time line course centers and parallels that change the process of communication lines, and all different angles are shaped lines of anomaly. Look at that expanding in position location your systems. All through tractions, all locations. Okay? So there you go. Woo! All right, but it gets complicated as you come into that. Okay? So it's how you indicate lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's how you indicate lines of letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols, and how to modify that, position your data that gets you in your communication in your systems and your core deposits. Okay? And position of your dimension line centers in your digital keys and set travels in that communication with core provision location system, all through tractions of 777 or 222 or position of 333, a balance of communication. Okay? Set lines of 1, 2, and 3 lines on position lines embedding. Okay? All right. We're going to go line core centers, core deposit line communication setting, convergence system, author traveling, directing line core centers and direction signals. That gets you in calculations green location setting. I'll see you guys in the Coliseum, level C, level E, level C, level E. Adios.